Now it's time to start piecing all of the diamonds and the background pieces together. If you start on illustration number 2 on page 9, you're going to sew the diamonds and the background pieces into rows. The small triangle is the background. Here we have the row with 1 diamond in the background, and here we have the row with 2 diamonds and a background. And that's all you're going to do. They're just going to be positioned in different places. And I always start with the 3-block row, and so you piece these 3 together, and these little arrows here show you which way to press. So these are pressed to the left, and then you piece these 2 together, the diamond and the background, and these are pressed to the right, and you piece the rows together, and the rows pieced together are shown on the other side. And this tells you to press towards the little triangle here. This is the small background triangle. This is the row with the 1 diamond and the background. And this is the row with the 2 diamonds and the background. And it makes a triangle. There's the bottom, there's the side, and this long piece is the hypotenuse. As you are piecing these rows together, so this row of 3 to this row of 2, you're going to match a seam here. I know it's difficult to see with this dark fabric, but this seam comes down here and then it matches with this seam here. And you match this seam the same way we match the seam for the borders, where you mark each side on the seam line and then match the 2 together as you piece them. So there's a place here you have to match, and also over here you have to match these 2 seams coming together this way. The same way you mark each one and put the pin in to match each point. As you piece this small triangles to each other and to the main quilt, you'll also have to match those points, so just be careful when you match the points. On illustration number 4, we see we have sewn the 2 triangles together. After we sew the 2 triangles together, we're going to sew the border. So if we go to illustration 5, we see the borders have been sewn on. After you have sewn your 2 small triangles together into 1 large triangle, you'll need to add the border to that triangle, the large triangle. And what I do is I fold the border in half and put a pin in the middle, and then the center seam where you sewed the 2 small triangles together, you're going to match that. So you flip it over, and again you're going to want this pieced part, unit B part, on top of your feed dog. So this will go under. So if we'll turn this over, and then we just start on one end and match the corners. This corner wasn't cut off, but you match the smart corners, and then just fill in the area between and put your pins that you need. And then go across. This is one side, and continue putting your pins in, as many as you need or as few as you need. And then we'll do the other side the same way. And then we'll take this to the machine and stitch with the unit B part at the bottom against your feed dogs to take in that excess from the bias edges. Now you'll have 4 large triangles with the border. The next thing we're going to do is stitch 2 together to make 2 halves. This is illustration 6 and shows the 2 half sections pieced together, and it also shows which way to press, and just follow the arrows. When you have pieced all of it, all of the pressing should be going in this direction. Once you piece the 2 halves, you're going to piece the 2 halves together, and this is the last illustration, number 7. And again, you're just going to stitch this long diagonal line, and it shows you which direction to press. And you'll notice that this one is pressed this way and this one is pressed that way. After we sew it, I'll show you how to handle this middle, very center of the quilt, so you won't have a big lump there. When you sew the 2 halves together, these points here, you want to match those exactly. You want everything coming to that center point. And so this point needs to match this point on the one that's getting stitched together on the 2 halves. And I'll show you how to do that now. This top one, the seam is pressed toward the right. And I'm looking for this vertical seam here and this diagonal seam here. The vertical seam is in black. You might not be able to see it. And the diagonal seam is in white. And where these 2 intersect, I'm going to place the pin. And then we're going to turn it over and check it. And it's hard to see, but it's pretty close to that point. So I'm going to try to get even closer. So there, that's a little bit closer. That's right on. And so then we take this and we match it to this point right here, where the point meets, and this is the ditch side. This seam is pressed toward the left, so the ditch is on the right. So we put the pin in the ditch right at the point. Then we pick this up and we make sure that the pin is perpendicular. What I mean by that is, if we match the top edges like this and we look at the pin and it's at an angle, that means we need to move this over. And we move it over until the pin is perpendicular. Let me show you that again. Here's the pin, it's at an angle. If we move the fabric over, now the pin is perpendicular. That means it's at a 90-degree angle to the fabric, the top of the fabric. That means it's going to be right spot on. And then we just pin it. We just pin it into the seam. And when you stitch this seam across, you get to this point here. You're going to stitch right where that pin enters the fabric. Right at the very last minute, you pull the pin out. Sometimes people will stitch right over the pin, and I do that sometimes, but it's up to you. And as far as the rest of these places where you normally match the seams where the diamonds intersect, you'll have to continue to match those seams as well. And then when we stitch this, I'll come back and show you how to handle the middle of this seam. This is the very center of your quilt, and we want to make sure there's not a big lump. So I'm going to show you how to fix that. Now I've stitched the final seam, and before we look at the front, I had to restitch that one, by the way, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. If we look at these seams that are already pressed, it's going in a counterclockwise direction. This is the back of the quilt. So these seams, this one needs to go up and this one needs to come down. Let me go zoom in for you now. This seam needs to be pressed in the upward direction, and this seam needs to be pressed downward. With the smart corners, a lot of the bulk has been trimmed off. And I know you can't see this, but if you press this seam up and this seam down, and then you move toward the center and just sort of rotate that a little bit, and you'll see a lot of that bulk just come out. So I would do this at the ironing board and press it as much as you can and just hit it with some steam and maybe some best press or whatever you use, or just whatever. Hot iron works fine too. So I would press from this part first because I can feel now there's just a slight little lump, but nothing major. Now let's look at the front. Let's see how we did at the front. Okay, let's see if we can see this. I need to not use white thread, so that did show a little bit. But you can see that the points meet very well in the center. And I did, when I first did this, I had to rip it out a little bit. And if you do want to rip it out, only rip out just about an inch on either side, inch and a half on either side. That's all you really need to do. And then redo your intersection and stitch it. So I'm pretty pleased with that, and it feels nice and unlumpy, so there shouldn't be any problem stitching over it.